Ian Fulcher, you designed the costumes for a very British scandal about the infamous divorce of the Duke and Duchess of Argyll in the 1960s. Since Margaret Campbell, the Duchess, was so well known for her look, was there a lot of pressure to capture like this very fashionable, well-known person?
I wouldn't say there was that. No, not really. I think because when we first started out, and in starting the projects and researching who Margaret was, and because I say she was very famous sort of in the 20s and 30s, and then when the divorce happened in the 60s, and then actually after that in the 70s. And so the sort of time frame we're doing is, or were doing, with 1947 up to the divorce in the 60s. And so it's that actually that sort of small area of her time was less documented. And so there's kind of less images of her around. So actually, when I kind of, we started creating a character and started creating all the looks, because she has so many different looks in the show, it was finding maybe the items and colors and fabrics that would be synonymous with Margaret. So for instance, there's this amazing photograph of Margaret in the 70s of her wearing this huge tiger kaftan, sat with her poodle in her Mayfair house. And obviously that was a period we weren't doing. So I thought, well, we've got to get that in the show somewhere. So I designed actually it's one of my favorite dresses in the show, the tiger print wrap round dress. She's so sexy, but it's having those sort of elements of the Margaret that people might know, but then putting them in our show. And then just because I think Margaret loved her animal skin and animal furs and her textures and those patterns. And so I kind of put more of those into her wardrobe. Like she's always decked out in these ridiculously amazing furs. So it's so decadent and sensual. And so actually I always think as a viewer, if you can feel that, and it's like you want to touch her. And there's something very sexual about that. And I love that. And I know Claire loved having that on her so that she felt more empowered and felt more sexual and sensual. I love it.
And you've talked about how you used a lot of Venetian wool for her character. What was it about that material that you felt was right for her and to build a wardrobe around?
Well, it was, I think, again, because we had a 6-week shoot, and she has 85 changes in 6 weeks, spanning 3 decades, which is just an insane amount to do. And so I tried to really pull it back in terms of her silhouettes. And even though the colors would change to denote the time that she's in, and if she's, let's say at the beginning in the 40s, she's a lot softer, and then it kind of comes stronger and more combative with the sort of strong reds with her and Ian in the 60s. And so my team, we decided to kind of pull it back and to keep a fabric as a core fabric for her outfits. So for the continuity, because sometimes I feel like the continuity with so many changes, it can become really jarring in the edits. So it's like bang, 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 constant changes. So actually we tried to pull it back to have a fabric that would flow in all these different changes, and the colors would flow into each other. And also Venetian wool photographs so beautifully. And so with Margaret's silhouette, because it was very form-fitting and all the skirts just caressed her figure, and on camera the lighting would just hit the surface in such a gorgeous way that and also in such a wealthy way. And she was this woman who was incredibly wealthy, and so on camera we wanted to make her this very wealthy, sensuous woman, because a lot of the time when you go, especially English fashion of the period, even if you're very wealthy, you can go a bit too heavy with the walls, and it's like a dense wall, and on camera it's too dense. So again, we tried to sort of maybe contemporize it, I suppose, a bit with that, and just make her more sensual but still very expensive looking. So that was the main reason for the Venetian wool choice.
And then you've got Paul Bettany as Ian, and a contrasting character in that he's not as, fashion forward in the same way. Well, it's like dressing a character and trying to convey a character who is a little bit more rigid and a little bit less, flamboyant in their style.
I think what was brilliant about Ian and Paul playing Ian is when I was researching the Duke, I was obviously researching from the 30s to the 40s and then with 56s. And actually I started looking at images of him later on in the 70s. I think he died in 74 or something. And I realized that the cuts of his suits never changed in, I don't know, 40 years. And so I thought, again, that's brilliant, because with us having so many changes throughout the episodes, again, it was trying to reduce the continuity. And so it was less jarring with all the changes. So I decided to keep the silhouettes of the three-piece suits, which again, I think so sartorial. And Paul, I mean, we're very lucky with Paul because he's got the most amazing figure, broad-shouldered, tiny waist and long legs. So he wears a suit so well. So that, I mean, everything for him was made as well. So I kept that core silhouette and we just changed it with the fabrics. But then say when he was in Biarritz, we then changed it for the colors to match the light, bright tones of the Biarritz when we're shooting there. We're not shooting there, it was in London, but yeah, we were shooting there. So I think it was, and also because he's playing because he had a flamboyance about him, but he was still of an aristocratic type. So there is a certain styling and type of that, but also like I'm trying to think, he had a bit more flamboyance to him. So even the way he dressed his pocket squares, and he always had a tie pin, and even the Argyle ducal crest signet ring, which was made for him as well. It's everything. It was like a notch up. So there's still an elegance, but it was almost, he was conforming a little bit more, but there was like a little bit more elegance to him as well. And I loved his leather World War I greatcoat that he wears, because we had to duplicate so many of them. They're all fantastically broken down. And again, Paul, he just looked like a fashion model wearing them. And I was so lucky. But every time he'd come to set, and the director would be like, oh God, another Vogue shoot we're doing here, because he'd just wear it. And he's like, wow, I'm very, very lucky.
And as you mentioned, the series spanning several years, multiple decades, was besides how the characters were changing, in terms of the emotions and the tones of what they were going through, was there a lot of change in how you were dressing, like in terms of the style at the time, in terms of trends from one decade to the next?
Yeah, I mean, obviously with Margaret, her I say actually the most obvious would be the hemlines and the fit of her suit. So we start in the 40s. So everything is all very nipped in the waist, sort of big sleeves, bigger, upper half. And then I get very sort of form-fitting with below the knee or mid-calf skirts. And then as the time went on, the decades went on into 60s, everything became shorter and all the cuts of the suits became boxier. And actually, we decided in the fittings with Claire that we'd still retain an echo of a waistline in her suiting, so it wasn't bang on straight. Just so it's again a little bit more flashing on camera, and again made it a little bit more sensual. And so the shapes becoming boxier, but we're sort of, I'm sort of adapting it again, because all the way through. Because we're doing period, but it's for a modern day audience, so you can be bang on correct. But I always think you've got to know how you can shift it so that as a viewer you will understand it, but still empathize and still understand who this character is. But again, with Paul's outfits, I mean, as I said, they didn't really change just because he didn't change. I love that.
Congratulations on your work on the show, and the dozens and dozens of costumes, especially for Margaret. It's been a pleasure talking to you about it.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.